Well, Kim, I want to thank you for joining us on this journey towards a healthier and maybe growing in our devotional life. As a church, of course, as people who follow Jesus, we want to thrive in our relationship with Him, and we know that devotional life is a key component to that. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about some of the obstacles towards a healthy devotional life. But before we do that, I just want to hear from you as to where you started in this whole thing of devotions, this private, quiet time with God. Where did that start?
Well, I have to go back to sometime in my 20s, and there was a speaker at our church that talked about the time with God and that you should spend a half an hour to an hour every day with God. And I thought, how am I going to do that with all the noise and action around the house? So anyway, so I decided the only room in the house that had a lock was the bathroom. So I went in, locked the door, and thought, okay, I'm going to do this. So we had a little, stuff to go by, sort of directions there. And so I sat on the only place there is to sit, and did my time with God. And I thought, wow, this works. And then I even got down on my knees to pray. And the first time it was kind of difficult, to have a half an hour. It was kind of difficult, but every day it got easier. And so that was the beginning of my journey with devotions. Yes.
So Kim, just to go back before that even, you grew up in a Christian home?
Oh, yes.
Devotional life, personal devotion, was that part of it? Or was it just something that wasn't talked about? Or?
Oh, well, yeah, we had family devotions. Like, my dad would always read, like I can remember him reading, "In the last days perilous times shall come, children will be disobedient to their parents," and he looked right at me, and
I can't imagine, Kim.
So anyway, and I didn't look forward to those times. I kind of, we had to kneel down and pray, and everybody had to pray whether they liked it or not. And so I didn't think of devotional time as something good. I mean, it wasn't something I looked back on and thought, oh, how wonderful.
Yeah. Now, you in your early 20s, life is busy. You get the call from the pulpit to spend half an hour in personal devotions. You find a quiet place to do this. How did you manage this just in life? How did you schedule it?
Well, at that time it was easy to schedule it, to put that time aside, because I wasn't working outside the home because my daughter was just young. But then later when I went back to work and I was working full time, it was very, very difficult. So during that time, I just did it in the car because it was 45 minutes to work. So I just would turn on the scripture or the music or whatever, and then I would imagine God was sitting in the seat beside me, in the car, and I would talk to Him, and it became kind of a holy place. I mean, I kind of missed it after, when I didn't have that, that commute. I kind of missed that time because it was great, but of course I couldn't journal or anything. I could only talk to God. It was good.
Yeah, that really, I think, speaks into this whole idea of, like, to some degree life just happens, and there's certain components in life you have very little say over, but you make the very best of those moments. And yeah, I really like that idea of using your commute, those moments, to spend that time with God. That's really wonderful. So you get into a routine, a rhythm, I guess is what we're talking about, of spending time with God, and then we make it a priority. We give it our very best, but then we sit down, and now our mind is just thinking about everything else, and our time becomes forced and doesn't seem to be accomplishing anything. What would you say to people who struggle with the running of the mind, if you will?
Well, the bottom line is everybody's mind thinks differently, but I always say you have to focus. You have to say, this is what this time is about. And where I would get my head back to where it belonged is to sometimes say things out loud, like the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, that type of thing. Verses that I knew. I would just say them, and I'd say them out loud. And I think the out loud thing worked well for me to get, so your mind, if you're quiet, sometimes your mind's here, you're thinking about other things. But if you're talking out loud, it doesn't happen.
Yeah, there's things we can do to train our thinking, to control our mind. Yeah, absolutely. Saying things out loud. Yes, next week we're going to be talking about journaling, and Carolyn is going to come talk to us about that. And it's another one of those ways that you can train your mind to keep it under control, if you will. One of the things that I learned in this is an acronym, STAAR, S-T-A-R, and the S was stop. Just stop it. This thinking about the next thing, the bills that have to be paid, whatever else, just stop. And then the T stood for take a breath, take a breather, like, all right, God, this time is for you. And then the A would be for appreciating God, the whole idea of just expressing our appreciation for His goodness. And then the R would be responding to what comes out of that time with God. And I know it's been helpful for me, not just in devotional life, but at those moments where life just kind of throws it at you, and you might just be getting a little too worked up and say, all right, let's have a STAAR moment.
Yes.
And I'm sure there's other ways, and maybe our small groups can talk about that in their own discussions. But so yeah, that's the controlling of the mind in all this. What about the distractions within our devotional time? I mean, you're talking about doing distractions, having to lock the door to the washroom, kids, all that kind of thing.
Yes. Yes, well, there are always distractions. Like one thing that I did was when I put this time aside, I wouldn't answer my phone. I just thought to myself, why should my phone interrupt God? If you think of it that way, of interrupting God, you might think differently. And other distractions can happen. Like, I mean, if you're a young mom and you've got little children and they're wanting you right now, I mean, there's nothing you could do about that. So one size doesn't fit all. And this for young moms, I feel for them very, very much, because they might want to do this with all their heart and mind and soul and the whole bit, but to find the time and to cancel out these distractions. That's fine to say, sit down and do what you said, the STAAR thing. But what if life happens. And
well, you know the story of the Wesleys, right? How they grew up, and their mother.
Oh, I love Susanna. Yeah, and then it says that she took each one, 9 children, and she took each one of them aside. She'd take a different child each day. And yeah, that was wonderful. But boy, she was a disciplined woman, because...
But it was also that side where she sat in her chair. There was no quiet spot because the kids were everywhere.
Yeah.
She put this blanket over top of her head, and the kids grew up knowing that if you interrupt, there was trouble.
Well, yes, and my mother said when she was growing up, she realized that there were again 8 children, and she realized that at a certain time of the day, her mother would go outside by herself. And my mom was very interested in, so she followed her one day. And my grandmother went out to sort of just where there was a little wooded area. Yeah. And there she fell to her knees and started to pray for her kids, every one of them.
What an example.
That's the only time she could get away. It's the only place, she could, with the family, the farm, the busyness. So it can be done, but it is difficult.
Yeah, there's some things we can do, some things just as not under our control. One of the things that did come to mind is these cell phones, for all those who, of course, use cell phones or devices of this nature for their devotional lives. All the notifications that come through while you're reading, while you're doing your thing on this phone. And of course, those are all distractions.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And the other thing I think you could, for younger moms and so on, you can't tell them, well, you have to spend this amount of time, because they can't.
Yeah.
So focus on, like, 2 verses. Find a couple verses in the scripture and meditate. Think about those verses. Write them on the back of your cupboard door so that every time you open the cupboard you see this verse. Yeah. And that's one way where you can make the connection even though you don't have a lot of time.
Yeah, I think it requires some flexibility as the seasons of life change that this may look different.
And so we can't come across too heavy as you must do this or you have to do this, right, because it's just not fair.
Yeah.
It's just not fair. Yeah.
So the verse from Luke chapter 8 comes to mind as well, the parable of the sower. Of course, it talks about distractions too, as Jesus explains the meaning of these different types of soil. The seed that fell among thorns stands for those who hear, but as they go on their way, they are choked by life's worries, riches, and pleasures, and they do not mature. So that whole idea that we can have this thriving devotional life, first thing in the morning, the best time of our day, but at some point life begins to happen again, and does the food of our devotion, will that actually feed us throughout the day? Yeah. Any thoughts on that?
Well, yes, because you think of all the things that can happen, because that's the day. Nothing's really happened too much in the beginning of the day, right? But when your day starts, you could go to work and somebody could be yelling at you and telling you you didn't do your job or something's wrong, or somebody could get on the phone and tell you that somebody had died, or you could, like I say, you could get something in the mail that would be like, oh my goodness, $800. How am I going to pay that? You know.
Yeah.
How am I going to handle this? So your mind then is so filled with life happening that God gets lost in the shuffle.
So what would you say to people to connect us to allow God to infiltrate those tough moments?
I guess you'd have to say, in the midst of all this, say to God, well, I know you're in control. Because the closer you walk with God, the more you know God, the more you realize He is in charge. And all of these things aren't difficult for Him. Like my aunt used to say, if God owns a cattle on 1,000 hills, I'm sure He can look after me. So, right. You know, get your mind back to that first place, that holy place, that place where you knew God was with you. And that's not always easy either, but that's what I would try to do.
Remembering the darkness, what God has shown you in the light.
Yeah.
That kind of an idea, and allowing God to be, allowing our devotion to really include the whole day, maybe even not just that moment in the morning or wherever we find that moment.
That's why it would be good to take a verse and just take it with you and maybe have it, maybe in your pocket, maybe in your wallet. Have the verse. You know, that might be a good thing to do too. Yeah.
Good. What would you say to people who are brand new to this, who are the young Kim in the early 20s, told from the pulpit kind of thing that they should be spending time with God all by themselves? What would you tell them?
Well, I would say that I would come alongside of somebody like that and probably journey with them for a while. I think that everybody needs somebody to journey with them when they're young. But there was this fella that I knew that he was new, and he simply devoured his Bible. Nobody had to tell him. He just devoured it. He just spent time. He wouldn't even go to bed at night. He'd be reading his Bible. So sometimes the young ones, the new ones, are better than the old ones as far as, you know, hooking up, because they're so eager to know God and to get that connection. But I feel that like there was somebody say in this church, a brand new believer, I really believe somebody should walk alongside of them.
So don't do it alone. And I suppose that goes for all of us, that we need. There's some irony in this, that we're talking about our private time with God.
Yeah.
But it's not just about the private time. We are segregating it in some way. We also need to be talking about it. I mean, we're showing this video in small groups, ideally, and as part of that small group meeting, we will talk about the previous week's devotion, the experiences within those devotions. But we need to talk about what God is telling us. Yeah,
Yeah, and the accountability comes in there too,
Yeah,
doesn't it?
that's good.
And walking side by side, or if you have a running partner or a walking partner or a partner to go with you if you're trying to diet or something like that. If you have somebody that you're accountable to, it really helps. It really helps. You don't have to have a bunch of people, but if you have at least one. Yeah.
No, that's good. So, great advice for those who are starting on the devotional journey. Find some other people to talk this through with. That was wonderful. What about those who have been doing devotions, the highs, the lows, the whole thing, for decades? What would you tell them?
Okay. What I would tell them is sometimes when you have done it for years, you're doing it out of duty. You're doing it from rote. And I would tell them to get a new devotional book that they haven't had before, and to even get a new Bible, because oftentimes in our Bibles, like I have one that my niece says, I want that Bible, Auntie Kim, because it's all marked up and I'll know where to look. But anyway, that's wrong, because if you get a new Bible, then God's going to speak to you new stuff, because we know if we walk with God for a while, He's always wanting to speak new stuff. So yeah, just get some different things, because you're resting on your laurels. And that's not good.
Yeah, I appreciate that insight. I mean, as valuable as all the underlying is for fresh insight, it's hard to ignore the underlying stuff. So we're feeding off insights from the past in some ways.
That's
so
right.
yeah. Anything else for those who have been journeying for a long time?
I think they have to refresh. Well, for instance, for myself, I mean, there's new ways, like because I'm a reader, I'm always finding new books, new devotional books, new books to read and everything like that. I think people should keep up with things. I don't think they should be harking back to the past all the time. This is the way we did it then, or this is what worked then. Well, yes, maybe it did, but what works now? Let's talk about now. Let's talk about this today. Let's talk about yesterday. Let's talk about last week. Let's say, what is God doing in your life now?
Yeah.
And that's the only way you're gonna stay healthy, is if He's doing something now. Otherwise, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's great insight. We were talking about that during one of our technical difficulties with this recording, but the tendency to just focus on the great insights that God has given us. I mean, they're wonderful.
Yeah.
But they could easily have been 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. And what's God speaking to us now? I mean, because really that's what we're working at in this whole series, is a thriving devotional life. Not 20 years ago, but today, tomorrow. So yeah, that's great insight.
Well, not only that, I think you would almost stop God from dealing with you in the present if you're busy with the past.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Any concluding thoughts? Any words of wisdom regarding obstacles?
Well, I think you have to keep refreshed. You have to keep growing, and you have to be honest with yourself, and you have to be honest with God, and you have to be honest with other people, and you have to be open, and you have to be vulnerable, and like you have to grow. So if you see yourself getting stale, and you're harking back to other times, I think that you would even say to God, and give me a new thing. Like when we went to that hearing from God,
Mm-hmm.
that was to me a new thing. And I thought, well, I've heard from God, but how many times have I actually heard? Like, I remember them because they were so absolutely clear and true. They were great. But I didn't hear from Him on a regular basis.
Right.
So that was new. And so I think that's the idea. Keep it updated.
Yeah, keep it fresh.
Yeah,
keep it fresh.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and there's nothing new under the sun. I guess we're talking about we're talking about new. We're talking about new to us, or refreshed for us. I mean, we're reading Jeremiah to ask for the ancient pathways and to walk in them.
Yeah.
And then you will find rest for your soul. That's the idea, the ancient pathways. So before we close this off, top 3, 4 things that should be part of a person's devotional life.
Okay, I think that it should be set a time to be alone with God, get the distractions out of the way,
Yeah.
focus on the Word and what God is saying to you. My own personal way of doing it is I'll write out the verse, what is God saying, and then what is God saying to me? Make it personal, and then what am I going to do about it?
Right.
And then back and forth, God can talk. He can say, what are you going to do about it? He's going to say, what are you going to do about it? Yeah. So that's, what else? Be diligent. Don't give up when it feels like you're not getting through, when it feels like nothing's happening. Don't give up. Keep it up. That's about it, I think.
Yeah, just put words in your mouth because you already said them earlier on, and share it with somebody else.
Yeah,
Right
it's
on.
always been good to do that, to get feedback. To get feedback, to say what God's, if you say it, if you reiterate something, if you reiterate it, it becomes more real to you.
Yeah.
So yes, what is God doing in my life? And then I say to somebody, this is what God is doing in my life. Yeah.
Very good. Well, thank you so much, Kim, for sharing your insights on this whole topic. I trust that you will continue to thrive in your devotional life. I've always seen you as somebody who has walked with Jesus for all these years, and is somebody who has taken it very serious and has actually really grown over the years in this area. So thank you for sharing your insights with us here today